Hey, what's up, guys? It's Trevi. Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. I got something a little different for you today. Now, there is a little bit of backstory to this video, and it's probably not going to be kind of on the same level of editing that my other videos are at, and there is a reason for that. Now, obviously, this is a Star Wars Armada battle report, and I love Star Wars Armada. For the longest time, it's probably still true. I thought it was the best miniatures game ever created. It's mechanically very interesting and different than a lot of other games, but unfortunately it has a big problem, which is that it was sort of unsupported and went about a year and a half without receiving any new releases. So I recorded 2 battle reports around the start of the year, so about 6 months ago, a little bit longer than that. And I was very excited about them. I bought a whole new camera, and I was really excited about doing a lot of After Effects and making it really professional looking. I was going to have the ships like shoot at each other while the video was going, and I started to rough draft that out. And unfortunately, sort of while I was doing that, kind of just lost interest with the game. I was prepping for a big regionals tournament. I went to the tournament, did pretty well, and unfortunately decided to stop playing after that because the game got really stale after not having any releases for a super duper long time. Now, that said, I do have the videos here, and I'm going to publish them for you guys. A lot of Armada releases were just announced at Gen Con, and I'm super excited about those, and it sort of reignited the spark with my local group as well, so I think we're going to start getting back on the Armada train at some point, and maybe I'll have some videos about that in the future, but for now, go ahead and enjoy this video. Obviously, it's not off meta because the meta hasn't changed in over a year, so it should still be a relevant video, and I hope you guys like it. Yeah, other than that, have a good day and stuff. Goodbye. Now, here is past Trevi from 6 months ago to talk to you about this game. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? How's it going? My name is Trevi, and I'm coming at you today with a Star Wars Armada battle report, my very first. It's pretty crazy. I'm pumped. Let's get on into this. I said in my previous channel update video I would be getting some different games on my channel, and I'm going to start with Star Wars Armada, a game that I very dearly love. If you've watched my battle reports in the past, from way back in the day when I did War Machine content, you'll know that my sort of technique is that I'll speed up the game to 400%, and I will commentate over it what actually happens in the game while we're playing. So hopefully that works for Armada as well as it did with War Machine. Please bear with me. I am sort of trying it out. I just have a brand new camera, and this was actually the first time I was using it, so I'm playing around with some camera angles, and we'll see how this method of making battle reports works for Star Wars Armada. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you have any criticisms or changes you'd like to make, please let me know, and I can incorporate that into future games. So first off, let's get started with the lists. I am playing some Imperial Navy with my best man, my favorite boy, Moff Jerjerrod over there. He can move my ships around super fast. It's pretty great. And I like a list that's sort of a hybrid list with him. I do have a full squadron loadout and a carrier, but as the icing on the cake there, I do have an Imperial 2-star destroyer. So getting into it, I have that ISD-2 like I mentioned. It is pretty light. Some ISD builds have a million bajillion upgrades on them, but mine just has a strategic advisor to pad the activations a little bit. Not super important because I don't have many to begin with, but it does help sometimes. An early warning system, which is a new upgrade that I'm trying out to play against specifically Sloane. There's a lot of Sloane people popping up around the area, as you'll see in this game. And then to cap things off, XI7 Turbolasers, which I think, honestly, probably is a must-have on literally every ship that can take turbolasers. For the most part, I think the upgrade is super-duper good, and if you're not playing it, especially on ships with big, huge shots like the ISD has, you're really missing out. Following that up, I also have a Gozanti Cruiser flotilla with a comms net just to pass on some tokens around and, again, pad those activations. And last, but possibly least. I do have a Quasar Fire 1 with a couple upgrades. It has a Flight Commander, so that'll let it activate squadrons after it moves, as well as boosted comms, so the activation range on that Quasar Fire is actually very long. Flight Controllers to buff up my anti-squadron a little bit, and lastly, Pursuant. A little Pursuant title there, which will give me a squadron dial if I reveal anything that isn't a squadron dial. Helps enormously against slicer tools, and if I ever need a navigate or something like that just to get out of a sticky situation, I can dial that, and without fear that I'll lose my squadron command. So that's a pretty decent build. I've been playing it a ton. It also comes in with a 14-point bid. Not enough to really outbid the lists that really super want to go first, but I'm hoping that those lists that bid 25 or 30 points will be relatively weak against the fighter loadout. I did not mention the fighter loadout, so let's talk about that a little bit. That has 4 TIE Defenders and 2 fire sprays, so mostly a bunch of generic beef. Defenders are good in every situation. They're decent against ships, not great, but okay. They also have amazing anti-squadron, especially in conjunction with those flight controllers, and those are the squadrons that Quasar Fire is going to be pushing around most of the time. They are pretty expensive, however. They are 16 points a pop, and those fire sprays are 18. That's a ton. So there is a Jumpmaster in there to jump in, let them get out of dodge once per game, essentially, if I need them to, with that intel ability. I did mention I have 2 fire sprays. Those are mostly to clean things up after the ISD goes in. Those are a couple heavy bombers to shoot some blue dice at people, which is pretty great. And Colonel Jendon to extend my the range I can activate them at with relay, and he can act, as a TIE Defender or a fire spray wherever I need. Colonel Jendon's a little bit of an awkward one. He doesn't work particularly well with some of the upgrades in the list, such as flight controllers. His shot doesn't work with flight controllers. But I'm not entirely sold on him, but I think he is still a strong squadron. So here's what I'm up against here. Another Imperialist. We are playing a mirror match today, but it isn't the same commander, so that's good. We did dodge that mirror. And it is some gross gray Imperials running Sloane. So I am going to be playing against Sloane this game, so we'll see how those early warning systems go. My opponent has 2 Gozanti Cruisers. One has a comms net, one has slicer tools, and I imagine that's some specific tech against enemy squadron heavy build, so you can hit them with that not squadron command one turn that they want to. Fortunately, I do have Pursuant on my Quasar Fire, so I do have a little bit of defense against that. But I can imagine that other Sloane lists that rely on things like a Star Destroyer to push their squadrons might have a little bit of trouble with that one turn of not being able to do that. My opponent's also bringing a Quasar Fire 1, and this is a bit of an interesting build. It has Instructor Goran on it, so we're already getting into some counter action going on here. Flight controllers and Stronghold, so that will essentially my opponent's going to be sticking as many squadrons as he can next to that that Quasar Fire, getting all of those buffs, and if I essentially just can't engage while all of the buffs are going. Speaking of squadrons, let's get into that real quick, talking about the carrier. We have Howlrunner and Dengar. So that we've got the whole combo going: Howlrunner, Instructor Goran, Dengar, and 4 TIE Interceptors. So those TIE Interceptors are going to be rolling at counter 5. That sounds right to me. They start at 2, +1 for Instructor Goran, +1 from Dengar, +1 from Howlrunner. There's also Black Squadron in there, little cheeky TIE fighter. Not quite as strong with the combo because he doesn't benefit from Howlrunner, but it does keep 1 or 2 shots off of those very expensive aces with Escort. It also starts with counter 1, so it's going to benefit from Instructor Goran and Dengar to be up to counter 3. So with Swarm, almost essentially rolling 4 blue dice. That's going to be real scary. To top things off, my opponent has brought 2 TIE Defender Squadrons, probably the same reason that I have them. They're decent against squadrons and decent against ships. And then with Sloane's ability, also, that 1 blue bomber actually means that every single facing on that blue dice is going to do something to an enemy ship. So that's pretty rad. There's also 4 TIE Interceptor Squadrons, which sort of close out that combo. Counter 5 Interceptors, pretty strong, and I basically can't fight them with my squadrons, so I'm going to try as hard not to. Closing out the list, we have an Interdictor Suppression Refit. Probably not the ship that I would have chosen for this particular build. I like to close things off with a big heavy hitter like Demolisher or a Star Destroyer or something like that. But my opponent's gone for an Interdictor. It is probably the hardest ship to kill in the entire game. Probably. Not entirely sold on that, but maybe it is. It has Admiral Sloane on it, so it is holding around or shipping around the Admiral there. Captain Brunson, as you can can imagine. Disposable Capacitors, Grav Shift Reroute as a little 2-point upgrade there. Interdictor to refresh Captain Brunson, and the interesting bit of tech here, we have Overload Pulse in the ion cannon slot. There is a little bit of discussion to be had there. Obviously, a lot of people take heavy ion emplacements to drain shields when it gets a crit off, but the Overload Pulse instead moves that crit to exhausting all of the target's defense tokens. And now you can imagine with Sloane, once your defense tokens are exhausted, you're basically just you're screwed there. The little squadrons are going to come in, they're going to burn all your tokens, and the next shot from the Interdictor is going to do a ton of damage. We'll see how it plays out. It is an interesting tech. I think the squadrons might just be doing fine on their own, honestly, taking tokens out. And maybe heavy ion emplacement is a little bit better, but we are experimenting a little bit, and I do like the innovation. So getting into the game here, like I said before, running a very heavy bid on my list, 14 points, my opponent only coming in at 4, so isn't able to beat me there. And I have chosen to take the first player, because I think the first activation with either the Star Destroyer or the Quasar Fire is extremely powerful. So I've taken that there. And out of my opponent's 3 objectives, he had Most Wanted, Navigational Hazards, and the one that I decided to pick, Fleet Ambush. Essentially because it wasn't able to give my opponent any points, and on top of that, I could potentially use the extra distance from Fleet Ambush to be able to get a dive on a soft target with my ISD, so we'll see how that goes in the game. So as you can see, here we are in deployment. Deployment's already started. The obstacles are down, a couple in the center there, but I have tried to keep some out to the corner so my opponent can't grab too many with his Grav Shift Reroute. Putting the Gozanti and the Star Destroyer as my odd-numbered ships in the middle as per the objective. One of the interesting things about the Fleet Ambush objective is that we do have to keep our fighters until all of the ships have deployed. So my opponent has significantly more drops than I do, even though I like to put the fighters down early in order to get that deployment advantage. It's not going to matter in this game, so that's one of the reasons I actually chose this objective. But we are starting to put the fighters down, and one thing I've learned to play against Sloane is that it's not really worth going in and actually trying to fight her fighters one-on-one. So I'm keeping my fighters pretty significantly back from where my opponents will be. I kept them behind my ships and hoping I could get my opponent to come in and attack my ships and allow me to get potentially a double activation with that first player advantage on my opponent's squadrons and take them out, especially if I can get my opponent to move his squadrons out of those defensive bubbles that he has with all of his synergies going on. Then I can potentially get a pretty strong alpha strike off and take out some of these low hull ships. So here we are just finishing up deployment. I've deployed all my ships at this point, so my opponent's just putting down the last of his squadrons, including his defenders, off in the corner there, and we begin the game. So we actually start with a little bit of activation padding here. I start off using my Strategic Advisor. My opponent moves a Gozanti that unfortunately I caught just off camera. And then I go back to using my Gozanti, passing off a token, I believe, to Pursuant to give him some squadrons early on. And we start activating our ships. My opponent's Slicer Tool moving up. Unfortunately, not really able to get in range with anything. Grabbing an engineering token with my Star Destroyer and using Jerjerrod actually to get some extra yaw to sort of angle myself in the direction I want to come in and fight. Sort of closing things out there, you can see my opponent's moving up with his Interdictor. My Quasar Fire goes, just grabs a Squadron token to get some more Squadron activations next turn, and my opponent goes with his own Quasar Fire. I believe his Stronghold over there is grabbing a Squadron token for itself and just shuffling up the table. Everything my opponent's going is Speed 1, whereas I should mention my ISD is Speed 2 currently, so he is going a little bit faster, and I do have a navigation command dialed for the second turn. Now you can see our squadrons going here. We are being very cagey, as I mentioned before. I'm not really moving my squadrons up at all. My opponent is worried about a defender moving in to engage a lot of his ships so that they can't move up. He does have Dengar there, though, so he could just free it up and then keep moving, but I don't think he wants to really have the Dengar's position dictated. He wants to be able to essentially move that formation wherever he wants, and he is keeping everything very close to Stronghold to get all of those defensive benefits. On my side particularly, I'm spreading out a lot so that a single interceptor can't come in and lock down most of my formation. As you can see, the Jumpmaster is staying very far back there, out of range to really come shoot at it. So it can potentially move up and try to open up any engagement that my opponent does. But we are going on to round 2, and I have a bit of a decision to make here. I decided to strategic advisor first, obviously. Not quite sure that was the correct call, but I am a little worried that my opponent will activate the slicer tool early and change that ISD's navigate dial to something else. I think I'm trying to bait out a stronghold activation before the ISD goes, though, so I'm taking a little bit of a gamble using that strategic advisor, and I'm moving my Gozanti right here, deciding where it's going to move. It does reveal a navigate and use it to go up a speed to get out of the distance of that debris field that the Grav ship reroute put in front of it. But we can see my opponent here sort of controversially taking the bait, strongholds activating, sending a lot of those ships up to take shots at the Gozanti. I believe one misses. He does get a hit through, one on the shield, burns through the scatter token, so it doesn't have a scatter anymore, and gets 1 damage on the hull, which I think it actually was a critical from a defender, but it was something that didn't matter. It was like I couldn't shoot ships at long range or something like that. And then drops Stronghold by accident, moving him, oops, and then moves up to keep all of those ships, those little ships, in range. Obviously, Stronghold moving up there gets me really excited. I activate the Star Destroyer, take a long-range shot at it, only roll 1 damage on those red dice. Those fickle red dice don't do super well for me, but I am psyched that I'm going to be able to get in with that Star Destroyer, get out of range of my opponent's slicer tool. I'm using my navigate dial to go up to speed 3, getting that extra yaw, so I can make a super cool maneuver, something like this. I'm using a Jerjerrod damage to get that first click, and then the yaw from the navigate to get the one on the end, and getting a sweet, sweet double arc on Stronghold. Now, I do even manage to get out of a double arc from the Interdictor as well, so we are lucking out there. I'm only going to eat 1 shot from the Interdictor, and I do have that flak out the front in case any of those fighters are able to get in. They're going to need to go to my back, and so they can't sort of be carried along with me. But I'm going to hope for a double activation on the ISD to blow up Stronghold, and we'll see where we can get from there. So now back to my opponent. They're obviously pretty worried about this Star Destroyer up in his face now. So he's going to activate that Interdictor, take a shot at the side of the Star Destroyer there. Obviously, the front arc would be obstructed from the flak, so he's going to take a shot at the side. Deals a reasonable amount of damage, gets that crit off with the Overload Pulse to exhaust all my defense tokens, and goes in and goes up to speed 2 with a token and rams the ISD. Dealing a damage to each of us. Obviously, the Interdictor doesn't really care about that hull damage. Plenty of engineering to fix that later. But it is back to me to activate my Quasar fire. So we can see Pursuant going now, moving up some squadrons. I am moving up to engage the squadrons that fired at the Gozanti. I'm using the debris field to shield them so that I'm shooting at a defender. The defender's not going to be able to get counter shots back at me. So I'm hopefully, getting some free damage in on here, I think. Use 1 defender shot and a shot from Jendon on that defender to double tap, taking out 1 TIE defender, and then a second defender, I think, is able to kill an interceptor outright. I do take some points of damage for that. But obviously, that's the big weakness of the interceptors there. They have only 3 hull points, and they really do take a pounding from those big 4 or 5 dice defender shots. So we have another defender going in. Now, we did have a little bit of confusion here. My opponent has a lot of the character little dials on his interceptors. Those are just regular interceptors. Just so we all know, he just didn't flip them over, because that's a lot of work on a bunch of squadrons. So my defender's moving in, taking some shots at the interceptors there, killing 1, killing a defender, and then putting a shield damage onto the Interdictor. And the Quasar fire just moving up at speed 1, just to stay back out of distance here. We are going to see the slicer tool Gozanti move in, try to get some slicing, hacking action going on one of these ships. I think it actually ends up being out of range of both, potentially with a move. So my opponent is going to be, I believe, reveal the navigate dial going down to speed 2, just to keep it out of range there, so it's not going to be in too much danger. Finally, we have the squadron phase, and that Gozanti did move up. I am worried about it slicing Pursuant, but I think it's going to just happen, and I am going to save that title card to swap into a squadron activation when I do get sliced. But I do end up using the scatter, I believe, with a fire spray shot there, just sort of keeping that fire spray around to harass those Gozantis as much as I can. And my opponent moving up with the last of his squadrons, getting all of those combos back in one place. Dengar going up there, and we can see Howlrunner and Black Squadron, I believe, moving up into range. A little crowded up there in front of Stronghold, so my opponent is trying to get the best positioning for his squadrons. But I think we do manage to move everything to where it needs to be in this squadron phase. All right, so we are going to round 3 here, and this is the big round. The ISD activating first. I believe I do decide where to put my flak, and I do decide to put it in the back because the ISD is going to be running after this. It does reveal engineering, fixes some damage, puts a 4 damage shot from the side arc into the front of the Quasar fire, and then rolls up the big guns, the big front cannon batteries into that Quasar fire, and we roll the God roll. 1 accuracy, 8 damage, blows it right off of the table right there, and that is a huge win for me. Obviously, those squads really need a carrier to push them around. None of those squads are rogue, and the Quasar Fire are very squishy. That is one of the big downsides of playing Stronghold. Stronghold, awesome title. Unfortunately, it puts that Quasar Fire in harm's way. Kind of the same deal with Gallant Haven, honestly. Any of those defensive squadron titles. But we are deciding where the ISD is going to move now. I do have to kind of maneuver around those 2 Gozantis and not get totally bombarded by the Interdictor, although I do think I end up double-arced with that ISD. So now my opponent, without the sort of looming shadow of that ISD activation over his head, able to kind of activate things a little bit more freely, decides to go with the Slicer Tool Gozanti over here, going up to speed 3 with a Navigate command, taking a shot at that fire spray while it's there, and then moving up and slicing Pursuant onto some garbage dial that I don't really want. Now back to me with the Gozanti going before it gets, really super bombed by these little squadrons here. Gets a pretty good anti-squadron shot out of its back, and then moving away as fast as my little tiny engines can carry me. I do go up to speed 3 with this guy just to get away from the squadrons. Remember, I don't have a scatter on that dude, so if he did not activate that immediately right there, I think either the Interdictor or the Gozanti kills him, and along with some squadrons. So I am happy to be able to get that guy out of dodge. So back to my opponent, we do see the Interdictor activation happening now. He does have a double arc with the Interdictor, although his front arc can only hit my rear, which is obstructed by the flak there from the early warning system. He does take that big shot to the rear. I do end up redirecting some to the shield closest to the camera here, and then gets a shot on my side that's able to deal a significant amount of damage. Gets a crit off with the overload pulse, so my remaining tokens are exhausted again, and I do take a bunch of damage, very low on shields on the ISD at this point. So with all those squadrons there, it is looking a little hairy for the ISD, although I think it can get away before it's taken down. Last but not least, we're seeing Pursuant activating now, burning its title in order to get a squadron command, and using its flight commander. So we are going to see Pursuant move and take some shots before it actually uses that squadron command. And I do think I ended up taking some shields down off of that Gozanti, the Slicer Tool Gozanti, and in there with an accurate shot from Pursuant. But now we see the squadrons going. I start with the Jumpmaster 5000, and it is in range to take a shot at the Gozanti. I don't think that ends up doing anything. Maybe it takes a shield out, but then moves up to engage a bunch of the squadrons up that my opponent has near the Star Destroyer. That's going to let me get at least one of those defenders out. Some of them are behind the rocks, so they aren't actually engaged, but I am going to give some of those TIE fighters their heavy, so I'm going to be able to shoot with the TIE Defenders and use that massive speed 5 to get out and repair on the station. So we can see 2 defenders having gone now, takes out Black Squadron and the Interceptor that was up there and damaged. So pretty effective activation from my ships at this point, but all of the aces, as you can see, are behind that Star Destroyer. Not super excited about going in and fighting those guys, so I think that's probably going to be basically the last you'll see of any squadron fighting for mostly the rest of this game. Any squadrons that go into that ball of interceptors and counter and stuff like that is probably going to get blown up, so we're going to be done with that. So we can see my opponent here activating the last ship. It is that Gozanti there in front of the Star Destroyer. Ordering a squadron command, actually, using Valen Rudor, just kills that Jumpmaster that was cheeky enough to get in there. Just 1 shot, 4 hits. Get out of here. Get out of town. Go home. You're done. Ordering a couple more squadrons to just take some shots at the Star Destroyer. Basically, shieldless at this point. So, no tokens, shieldless. Everything's going to the hull. Just a bunch of damage. And hilariously enough, the Gozanti itself actually did have a double arc on the ISD as well, so it was able to put 2 blue dice of its own, which did help, I think, take down all but one of its shields. So really good, looking a little frail on the Star Destroyer here, but it is a Star Destroyer. Plenty of hull to take those shots, so we'll see if it can get through it. We do have the fire sprays going in on the slicer tool. Gozanti there do end up taking its scatter out, I believe, and so now it's just down to the Quasar fire to finish that thing off. Last but not least, a couple more squadrons coming in, burn through all of the ISD's tokens, and then I get an extra shot from Jendon onto that Gozanti there, and that does end up dealing 2 hull damage to it. So almost dead on that slicer tool Gozanti. And we're going into the next round just with some last squadron maneuvering to catch that Star Destroyer as it moves. And then we'll be off. So we're going into round 4 here, right past the midpoint of the game, getting on to the close of that game. And I decided to go with the Quasar Fire first, actually. Reveal a squadron command, as you do with Quasar Fires. And sending some squadrons over. I do actually send a Defender over into the midst of the swarm. That is because I want my opponent essentially to be able to have to shoot that Defender instead of putting more damage on that Star Destroyer. I do get a pretty sweet shot off on the Defender. I think I kill an interceptor that was damaged. I do take some significant damage from the counter back. Some sweet counter 4 interceptors going on over there. But we do start bombing the front of the Interdictor, actually. So I figure at this point, the Gozanti is essentially going to die automatically from a ram. I do have double arc, I believe, or maybe just the single arc onto the Interdictor. It is obstructed, and so I start taking some shots. I figure at this point, maybe I have some bombers. It's turn 4. I got a couple more turns of bombing at that Interdictor. Maybe I can do something. Unfortunately, Brunson starts coming in, removing some damage from it, and it has already repaired essentially all of the damage I've done to it this game. So probably not actually going to deal anything. But you can see that the Gozanti did get automatically killed by a straightforward ram there from the Quasar Fire, and the Quasar Fire ended up just staying. So now my opponent, obviously the Interdictor's not in any danger really, like from the back arc of the Star Destroyer. That doesn't really matter. So we are seeing the Gozanti do some anti-squadron or some squadron activations. It ends up, I believe it kills off that Defender that's sitting right there. Oh, not quite. Deals a significant amount of damage. Deals some more hull damage to the ISD as well, and then moves over so that it can just be barely in the ISD's side arc. So not double arced on that. That Gozanti, but we are going to go with the ISD now, try to get away from some of those squadrons as soon as possible. I take a casual side arc shot, roll the accuracy 4 damage to kill that Gozanti. Pretty sure I could have finished it off with squadrons if I needed to, but really happy with just randomly killing it there. I do take some side arc gunnery shot at the side, some anti-squadron shot. Don't actually have gunnery teams, so don't get confused there. And I don't think I do anything super important, but those 3 hull interceptors, they do take significant damage from anti-squadron shots. So now we can see here we have the Interdictor going, taking a big old shot at the Quasar Fire, not rolling a ton of damage if I remember correctly. I think 3 damage that gets reduced and moved around by the defense tokens. Not an enormous amount, and only in the front arc. We do get a cheeky damage off an anti-squadron at the Defender in the back there, but I don't even think we get close enough to ram, if I remember correctly. I think the Interdictor just moves up, hopefully trying to catch that Quasar Fire in a side arc, front, double arc shot as well to finish it off. But fortunately, with Jerjerrod on the table, basically you never know where Jerjerrod's ships are going to go. They go anywhere they want, really. They have a passport to every country. They just you can't pin them down. Last ship there, we saw that Gozanti go, the last Gozanti go on the table. I think threw some engineering into the Star Destroyer just to keep some shields up in case those squadrons do get cheeky. But without any ship to push them around, I think the Star Destroyer is out of danger. It did take 3 or 4 hull damage at this point between the Interdictor shots and all the squadrons pecking at it. But fortunately, I think it is going speed 3, so it's going to be able to escape the worst of those squadron fights. My opponent going into the squadron phase now, I do bomb the Interdictor. I think I do get a hull damage on it again, but that's not going to last. And then my opponent is able to finish off my defender that I sent in to hold up the swarm and starts moving in to try to head off that Quasar fire, potentially try to get a hit on that Quasar fire before it's able to escape. So now we are going into round 5, second to last round of the game. The Quasar fire activates first because it is right in the middle of that that Interdictor's arc there. I really want to get out of there. It does double arc the Interdictor with those weird side arcs that the Quasar fire has. It does some damage to it. I think hits a hull damage on it, but Brunson, drops a die, and then is able to scoot out of its front arc just into its side. And really, at this point, the game's essentially over. The Quasar fire's only taken 1 hull damage. We see a couple more shield damage get piled onto it by the Interdictor's side arc. Didn't even need to use disposable capacitors because the Quasar fire's already right there in short range. And we do see some anti-squadron going on at the bombers over there, but really nothing to really do anything that matters. All of the defenders are 4 or 5 hit points, so nothing's really going to kill them. Nothing can order the squadrons in the back there, so they're going to either move or So really, it's kind of a wrap-up at this point. As you can see, the ISD getting even farther away from my opponent's ships. But that is going to end up with a pretty resounding victory to me. Looks like 187 on my side, on the cool red Empire side, killing a handful of squadrons, both Gozantis, as well as pretty expensive, kind of loaded out Quasar fire build there. My opponent getting I believe 28 points for taking out the Jumpmaster and a Defender Squadron there, so sort of a rout, honestly. But I think that is one of the dangers of playing that Stronghold. The squadron synergies themselves all put together extremely powerful, not something I can actually fight with my own squadrons, but unfortunately it does require the Quasar fire to get sort of into a dangerous area of the table there. There's a handshake ending the game on turn 6, we just called it. But, like I was saying, it requires you to put that Quasar fire in harm's way, and I think it makes it a pretty juicy target for something like that Star Destroyer. On top of that, I think the selection of Fleet Ambush didn't really help my opponent, obviously. I think what my opponent needed to do was sort of keep that fighter ball a little bit farther away from the Star Destroyer, so that I had to work a little harder to get all the way over to Stronghold if it was pretty far away, and then use the Interdictor to sort of pin me in if I did try to do that. And my opponent obviously activating Stronghold pretty early in that turn that I was able to move the Star Destroyer in. Sort of showed his hand, let me get that Star Destroyer in the optimal position for the double attack. It ended up taking out the Quasar fire and securing the victory. Obviously, Sloane, super scary opponent, though. If the carrier is able to, keep pushing the squadrons forward and just send, an unending wave of interceptors at my ships, I don't think I survive very long. The Star Destroyer can kind of go do whatever it wants. It's not as worried about Sloane's squadrons, them not being, particularly strong at dealing damage. It does take the tokens out, although my opponent doesn't have a great way of sort of following up on that, unfortunately, in this list. Something like an ISD, I think, helps a lot over the Interdictor. But Sloane's squadrons are very easily able to take out my squadrons pretty easily and burn down my own carrier. And I think if my opponent had been a little more cagey with that Stronghold, then I think this game easily could have gone the other way, and I lose a Quasar fire and ultimately the game. But I hope you guys enjoyed this battle report. I hope you guys enjoyed the format. Interesting to see it work out with a Armada game instead of a War Machine game. So I do hope it worked out and was enjoyable to watch. Would love to hear what you guys think about the format. If you have any suggestions, absolutely send them over. And if you have any games you'd like me to play, I am looking for some new games to try out. Honestly, miniatures games. I'm going to be playing a lot of Breachstorm, I think, pretty soon. We just finished up the pre-order, and those are shipping pretty soon. If you don't know what Breachstorm is, I think there's a video up on my channel, but you should honestly go check it out, breachstorm.com. I'm going to plug that a little bit, and hopefully record some games of Breachstorm in the future, or early 2019, when we have some nice painted up miniatures and some nice tables going on. But it's going to be great. But in the interim, looking for some new miniatures games, and if there's anything anybody really has a hankering for and really enjoys, then let me know, and I can potentially make some videos about it. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, just expect more content from me. Hopefully do some more battle reports like this. I am psyched to get back on the video making train, and I hope you guys can get on aboard with me. Have a good day, ladies and gentlemen.